So cool. All right, we're good. Let's get to it. Let's see who all is here. So we have the pleasure of sharing our screens today with a wonderful group of industry leaders who are well-versed in all of the wonderful world of anime. First, we have Azusa Matsuda, give a little wave, Senior Director of Business Development at the Society for the Promotion of Japanese Animation. We have Doug Montgomery, founder and executive producer and CEO of Global Connects. Jerome Mazandarani, executive producer of the Netflix original anime Cannon Busters. And Renee Engelhardt, our global partner insights director here at Parrot Analytics. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. To kick things off, Renee is going to walk through some data that we have pulled about anime. It's going to set the scene and provide some great context for the conversation that we'll have with all our panelists. So Renee, go for it.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. So at Parrot Analytics, we measure demand by capturing online audience engagement related to all types of content, be it TV shows, movies, or talent. And so throughout the session today, I'm going to share a few of our data points that will help set the scene and guide our conversation. So let's dive in with our first data point. So you can see here that anime, or the demand for anime in the US, grew 32% year over year from 2020 to 2021. So our first question to the panel is, why do you believe the genre is gaining in popularity outside of Japan, and especially with US audiences? So Doug, can you kick us off?
Sure, thanks, Renee. Yeah, this is a good question. Looking at the chart here, looking at Q1 2020 versus Q1 2021, 32% increase is a lot. Quite frankly, I think part of that, well, there's a few things going on. One, the pandemic, people being stuck at home or safe at home, pushed their eyeballs from the soccer fields and things to the television. So I think there was a larger exposure to Japanese anime. Second of all, I think Japanese anime has really been on a slow burn for many, many years. The big bump from last year, again, I think is due to, a lot of it is due to the pandemic. A lot of things kind of jumped up. But second of all, the slow burn has been on since the early 60s when Osamu Tezuka first brought over anime to the US with the Astro Boy. And I think the root of that was that it was just quite different from what was being shown before. And when audiences get exposed to something new and different, often they find something in it that they have not seen before.
All great points. Azusa, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, definitely, pandemic, but then, having anime more accessible on the streaming platforms has definitely helped because, you don't have to look for anime to consume anime. It's just, right there on any of the streaming platforms. So I think that definitely helps as well.
And Jerome, any opening thoughts on this increase?
Yeah, I think all of the traditional barriers to accessing the content have been removed. I think accessing anime through a legal streaming sites, either SVOD or ad-supported, is easier than some of the piracy sites, which is great. I think coinciding with the pandemic, there had been quite some really good efforts in some major territories clamping down on piracy, and I think that's borne fruit. And I think as Doug mentioned, I think it's been a slow burn. I think that foreign audiences or global audiences are now becoming more sophisticated in their tastes and demands for scripted animation content.
Yeah, all great points. So now we're going to take a look at the supply and demand for anime content. So when we look at the global demand for anime, we see that it accounts for about 4.7% of demand for all content, just behind sitcoms and crime dramas. But the count of anime shows, which is what we refer to as a supply, represents 3.2%. So this tells us that there's actually a 33% gap between the share of attention audiences give to the genre and the supply of titles available to them, which presents an opportunity for expansion. So this leads me to our second discussion point, the art and challenges of making and distributing anime. So Jerome, as a creator of Cannon Busters, the Netflix original anime series, can you share a few of the challenges you faced while producing the show? Like, what makes producing anime different from producing regular scripted animated content?
Yeah, well, gosh, that's a good question. I should clarify that I'm not the creator of Cannabusters. That's LaShawn Thomas. I was his executive producer partner. So I think, well, you know, it takes a village to make an anime. But I think LaShawn and I were probably the most sort of involved in the whole process from start to finish. But I think the challenges with producing anime in particular is how can we as non-Japanese creatives and content executives and people that are responsible for making and delivering these stories to global audiences, how can we fill this supply deficit when we're not Japanese, we're not part of the Japanese animation ecosystem? Because there's some big challenges. There's the language barrier, which can be easily overcome. There's cultural barriers. There's the way of doing business and the way of producing animation and running a pipeline and a workflow is quite different. How much control do you want over the finished product? Because there's a hell of a lot of give and take through a gaijin producer. That was one thing that we learned. Even if you have your series director producer embedded in the studio, it's still incredibly hard to maintain control and a level of consistency with the if you're delivering 6 or 12 TV half hours. And I think there's some major structural challenges within the Japanese animation industry that might make it very difficult for Japan on its own to fill this supply deficit. I think, the waiting time to get in a studio, to get your project going at a studio from today, usually 2 to 3 years. So that'll be a frustrating factor as well.
Is the 2 to 3 years from the conception of the idea through the distribution and having it be available for audiences, or is that 2 to 3 years just the time it takes to create the actual content itself?
Yeah, it's about a 2 to 3 year process overall. I think from concept to delivery. What I meant is that there's up to a 2 to 3 year waiting time to get your slot at the studio. So that's a big challenge. And I think as anime becomes more global and the industry in Japan starts to address its structural problems, we're starting to see, more honest discussion, between streaming platforms, distributors, and the industry in Japan about ways that they can meet some of those challenges.
Mm-hmm. And Doug, on the similar vein, so you've been on the other side, more so with like the distribution side, and work now as a connector between Japanese and Western entertainment organizations. So what should distributors keep in mind as they are starting to dip their toes into the anime genre and expanding their catalogs to include this content on their platforms?
Yeah, you ask a good question. And you kind of mentioned the table. So it all depends on what side of the table you're on, right? So you could be on, let's say, Netflix side of the table, or you could be on, the Japanese creator side of the table. But I'll go back to what Jerome said about control. I think, if you take it from the Japanese creators side of the table, they have not in the past, and this will not change in the future anytime soon, I would argue enough control over the distribution. The big distributors of anime in the US for the last decade or so have been Crunchyroll and Funimation, basically US companies, right? Exploiting the opportunity given to them by Japanese creators. Second of all, now we have Netflix going to Japan and setting up their own studio. Chinese companies are going in as well. So I think from the perspective of the Japanese creator and the Japanese studio, they need to have more control over the distribution. Again, that won't solve this gap that you see in your chart here quickly, because that takes time. But also, like you said, Renee, that is the opportunity for them. And I think, if you took a longer view of the whole situation, that is something that I think the Japanese creators should have their eye on. As mentioned earlier, anime's popularity has been a slow burn. If it's been a slow burn to get here, it's likely not to go anywhere soon.
Interesting. So do you find that there is increasing competition between different platforms in these discussions with distributors and the studios?
Oh, absolutely,
Due to the
yes.
increasing demand?
Yes, absolutely, yes. And that competition, again, like Jerome was kind of alluding to, again, these creators, I mean, they may find now that there's more demand for their services, so their wages or the rewards for their creations can go up. Again, I'm taking it from perspective of kind of the rights holders and that kind of thing, and I believe that they should be doing more of their own distribution, having more control over how the products are being used and sold overseas.
Mm-hmm. Azusa, anything you'd want to add to this?
Yeah, just like Jerome and Doug was pointing out, but production of anime in Japan is very much of a template structure. So if you're, a creator who is not part of this, already made structure, it's really hard to get funded for your project. And there's a longer wait, and like Jerome was saying, and availability of the anime studios and things like that. So it's really hard for creators to keep creating if you're not part of this structure.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so we've actually been talking about anime creation originating from Japan. So now let's actually take a look at the demand for anime outside of Japan. So looking at this heat map, it actually showcases the top 10 markets with the most demand for anime indexed against the United States. So clearly, fandom, it's global, it's diverse. And so let's dive into this diversity a bit more and add some more color to this topic. So Azusa, so the Society for the Promotion of Japanese Animation has hosted the World Anime Expo for the last 30 years, and it brings together anime fans all under one roof. Can you talk to us a little bit about the anime fandom as a whole and what sort of changes you've seen over the years from putting on this convention?
Sure. So anime fandom has, evolved with the growth of popularity in anime. So, 30 years ago when we started, it was very much of a core fans kind of traveling far to connect with people who shares the same passion and love for anime. But over the years, we have seen the change in that. Right now, we have more than 360 anime conventions in the United States, and they're all over the place. So, you can basically go, before the pandemic, you can basically go and celebrate anime, with the fellow fans, every other week in your neighborhood. And so that's been a big change since the beginning of the time. And then there are a couple trends that kind of reflects the evolution of the society as well. So with social media use, with Facebook and Instagram, we had a big growth in our event back in 2012 when people started, using Facebook, and, the cosplay community, like they love posting their photos, sharing it, and people were like wondering, oh, what's going on? I want to go check it out. And then another thing is the streaming website platforms. More and more we use, places like Netflix or Hulu or, Crunchyroll. There are more like increase of casual fans. So, back in 2014, when these platforms started developing and more people are watching it through the streaming, we saw a growth in our attendee base as well. And those are, not necessarily the hardcore fans, but then they've seen it on streaming and then they want to know more about it and they want to come and celebrate with the fellow fans. So there are like couple events like that through the growth of the fandom.
Are there any misconceptions, or maybe not a misconception, but like a blocker for potentially a new fan into the genre? Like what can somebody do, or how can we start to break the mold of, breaking down those barriers of entry for non-fans of anime?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is anime is for kids, and it's a very niche genre, right? So there is anime for all ages, and it's not necessarily for just for kids. And at the same time, Pokemon and Dragon Ball has been, they're out there for like about over 20 years. So people who, grew up watching Pokemon or Dragon Ball is now old enough to have a family on their own. And then they come back to our event with the whole family in cosplay. So it's definitely not a niche anymore. We're seeing the same type of pattern that kind of we see in Comic-Con fan base. They're, the fans are older, and, they have family, and the kids comes to the convention. We've seen the same pattern in anime conventions as well.
Yeah, I definitely see content and what parents enjoy is starting to trickle down to their kids. So it's a full life cycle of content and new audiences discovering it over time. Jerome, any thoughts on fandom?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on everything, so I'll try to be short. I'll try to be succinct. I think one thing that really fascinates me is in terms of global fandom, especially in the territories I'm most familiar with, which is the English-speaking world and continental Europe, especially the EU, is the diversity of the audience base. I think in the English-speaking world, particularly in North America, more than 30% of the audience are African American, Latino, Hispanic, non-white audience. That would also include our Asian American, Pacific Islander people as well. So I think that's really fascinating. I think anecdotally for me, I've been working in anime in the UK for 16 years, and I always noticed that a large proportion of the comic convention, anime convention audience here was British Caribbean and Asian. So that'd be Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi people. And so I think that audience has always been there since the VHS and home video days. I think that's wonderful, and I like finding ways we can engage, nurture, delight, surprise that audience, bring them in closer. And it is a challenge because anime is produced in a monoculture, and so questions around representation within the programming are harder to address. But I think companies like Crunchyroll, Netflix, Funimation do a wonderful job of representing those audiences and those fans within their audience development and the content they create to support the fan movement. So yeah, that's my big takeaway.
Awesome, Doug. Any thoughts?
I guess if the question is how can we get new fans or non-traditional fans of anime into the world, I have a couple of thoughts. One is the connection between anime and video games is actually quite strong. Right. I mean, a lot of these video game worlds and a lot of these anime worlds are very similar. In some of the cases, if you look at, the success of like Dragon Ball, even did I think $30 million in 2019 in the U.S. in box office. A lot of the awareness of that has come from the Dragon Ball games. So if you can bring in these gamers who are not necessarily your traditional the traditional age, because gamers' ages can start skewing up older as opposed to anime. And the second one is language, and that's always been kind of a concern. But I think now with the streamers and the subtitling that's being done, people are getting more and more used to seeing things with subtitles, and language can become less of a barrier going forward.
In the similar vein as the video games, like, do you see a role, or what role does merchandising play with anime, or like creating action figures or like physical anime features? Like, does that play a role in either bringing in new audiences or helping sustain the audiences that already exist?
If you take like demand as consumer spend or dollars, it's everything, right? So if you look at a company like Disney, they have a whole system set up to have fans buy expensive plush toys, right? Because they did $65 billion in consumer product sales. And also the Japanese brands, Pokemon and Hello Kitty, etc. They do huge business in merchandising, and that kind of keeps the product in front of fans' faces 365 days of the year. Whereas we talked earlier about the kind of the constraints on supply. It's hard to keep the shows coming out on the same cadence as you could if you are simply putting the brand on something in the store, whether it's a T-shirt, a plush toy, or a cereal box.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the L&M industry and the toy industry is really latched on to everyone's a fan, everyone's a collector. And I think we can see now that patterns of play for children revolving around IP like anime, especially for young boys, is very prevalent in video games. And I think rather than them maybe getting a Dragon Ball Z figure to play with, they may well be going straight to the console game or one of the excellent mobile games they have for Dragon Ball Z. And that's what they're able to play with their friends online in those games and interact with the characters in the world. So it's great brand extension. It's probably one of the main reasons Dragon Ball Z is still in the top 5 anime IP globally. But we do also see higher end premium collectibles going into mainstream toy stores and being sold through Amazon and other online retailers, and not just through specialist collector websites for anime fans. That's one thing I've noticed a lot in the UK, and I think we're nowhere near as sophisticated or developed as the North American market. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another trend we'll see. We'll start to see more mainstreaming of figurines, not for play, but as collectible objects, and I think we'll see companies targeting younger with that. Funko Pop have really smashed that wide open, and I think we'll see that. And you're developing a lifetime of hobby and collecting. I feel sorry for the wives in the future.
At what point in the creative process or like the production process of either an anime movie or series does the concept or the thought of merchandising and expanding the brand beyond just the actual show itself? Like, how early in the process is that driving the motives or the creation of the actual content itself?
I would at inception, at the formation of the production committee. So anime is generally produced in a consortium, and it'll consist of half a dozen to a dozen different partners, and it'll be bringing in the animation studio, the IP owner or publisher, the manga publisher, for example, and the creator of the IP. It'll bring in a toy company. It'll probably bring in a video game partner or mobile game partner, plus maybe some of the distribution partners, either the TV network or the streamer. So like right at the beginning, from inception, that will be a factor.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at like the big Hollywood movies, and if you think that anime is kind of moving up the totem pole near the top and becoming that level, I mean, when you greenlight something, you look at where you're gonna get the money from all the different pieces, right? Because that's what's going to justify your budget. So like Jerome said, it's from the very beginning.
Yeah, merchandise is really huge on the fandom events as well. So a lot of the companies will release something exclusive during Anime Expo, and people line up, to collect all this, either whether it's the figures or any other merchandise. So one of the top 3 reasons for fans to attend the event is merchandise.
Awesome, great. All right, so let's move on to our last data point of discussion, which is around the variety that's within the anime genre. So we've been referring to the genre as if it's like one thing, but we can see here that it's actually comprised of many different themes within their own micro genres. And so what this chart is illustrating here is it's telling us which microgenres are undersaturated in terms of demand and represent potential opportunities. So the prime example on this chart is the superhero genre, which is in the top left, that green box, that top left quadrant. And that represents all the different microgenres where there's a high demand, but a low supply. And so Jerome, so how do you see entertainment organizations taking advantage of this diversity or these diverse opportunities for expansion into anime and these various different microgenres?
Yeah, it's a good question. On the Parrot, the special anime report that we've been referencing, you have a table which covers, I think it's like a top 50 or top 50 anime. And if we have a look at the top 5 anime franchises in Japan from that report, we have Attack on Titan at number 1, My Hero Academia, Neon Genesis Evangelion, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and One Piece. And what I think is a key takeaway for me is that these are all highly genre-specific programs. Attack on Titan's dystopian fantasy. My Hero Academia is superheroes, kind of like the X-Men. Evangelion is a classic sci-fi giant robot story. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a sort of action horror comedy hybrid, and One Piece is a high seas pirates action adventure series with comedy. And what for me, I think is important to point out is those are all globally popular genres where in most of the major territories we are producing similar content that cover the same sort of stories and mythologies and genres. So what makes these anime so different and special, and why are they sort of over-indexing on demand when we have a lot of generic genre content like this coming from all over the place? And I think it's the Japaneseness of it. It's the Japanese lens. It's seeing the X-Men through a Japanese lens. One Punch Man is one of my favorite programs, and that is a very Japanese take on Superman, really. It creates this wonderful comedic take on superheroes, which you just wouldn't see anywhere else. So I think there is a reason why anime is so popular, not just because it's delivering mature stories in genre, whereas in the English-speaking world, all you get if you're an adult is Sausage Party or Family Guy, or the Adult Swim stuff, or the Noodle Arm Cartoon Network stuff, and that's it. So it's not just that anime caters to all of these cool genres that our own productions don't. I think it is that unique Japanese lens, and that is a problem, I think, for us Western or foreign producers, because it's like, how can we fill some of this demand and cash in on that with productions when we're probably not going to be able to make them in Japan? So how do we deliver something that will get a meaningful chunk of that opportunity, that audience opportunity? And I think, I think the danger would be to try and ape anime too much. But again, maybe looking at the two different audiences, that was the one thing I was going to say, which is you've got Otaku, who are the hardcore. And Otaku is used as a pejorative, it's used as a sort of a put down in Japan. It's like, like the words geek and nerd used to be sort of put down. It's not anymore. They rule the world now, unfortunately. But I think there's more value in the casual audience than there is in the Otaku audience for many of the people watching this seminar today. I think programs like Invincible and Castlevania are a really good example of that anime adjacent type of content that we know how to make, and we can make through our pipelines out of North America into Korea and Europe, and we can probably create new global production pipelines to make shows that will probably cross over and appeal to some of the Otaku, will definitely appeal to the casual audience. And we have the know-how, we have the pipelines to make those programs, and we can Invincible probably wouldn't have worked if it wasn't such a spot on adaptation of the comic book material. There's always a danger if we take our IP to Japan and we need to make certain changes and compromises creatively, that we won't necessarily end up with something as good as the material that inspired it. So that's that's I think my main sort of feeling about that.
No, you bring up a great point with this concept of like the casual viewer, because I think what was eye-popping for me when we started looking at the data was that all of these different types of genres exist within anime. And so to bring in the casual viewer, knowing that there's, you know, comedy and action and potentially even sports as themes or content in an anime series, I think it's going back to what we were talking about before about fandom. I think it's a great way to bring in those casual viewers that might have been a bit hesitant or not even know where to start when to explore, you're like which show to even watch first when it comes to anime.
Yeah. I guess just one last point that's probably important, because I had a really great conversation with a colleague in the US this afternoon from the anime industry. And I think one of the reasons mystery and romance is sort of oversaturated is because domestically in Japan, the largest growing audience for anime are older women. And mystery, romance, the sort of idol sort of dramas and comedies are three of the most popular genres for that very important growing audience. The reason that audience is so important domestically is they buy merch. They buy lots of it. They're the same audience that have fueled the success of Hello Kitty, for example, and Agretsuko. So I think that's a nice, just for me, that's a nice little thing to drop in there, just as to give a bit of context about why we can see oversaturation. These things might not work in our market, but they're fueling, they're sort of fueling a lot of production companies and studios, because the license and merchandising is what makes all the difference. If people are getting 5% back end on that, it's brilliant, because and the gains that those studios will make domestically from a success like that dwarf any types of financial gains they'll make doing work for hire or a global anime original co-production that's just going to go straight to a streaming platform.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant call out. Doug, any thoughts on this?
You know, the one that sticks out here to me is horror. And you know, Japanese horror actually is quite famous, has been around, been successful in the US for a while with things like Ring and The Grudge and those kind of things. So I think, you know, there's always opportunity, but I think there's a danger when you try to localize something. I can give an example from Warner Brothers. Warner saw the size of the anime business in Japan. Warner has a property called Batman, in case you guys have heard of it. Batman does not do all that well in Japan. So the company thought, you know, if we kind of made it anime-like, would it do well? So it's a big project that went on for a couple of years, and Batman Ninja was born. I think stylistically it was accepted as, you know, kind of anime or pure anime, but the story probably not as much. And so if you look at kind of the basic of anything is the story, you got to be very careful on how that's going to translate or how that can be localized or remade.
Good points. And then Azusa, any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, like Jerome kind of touched on it, but then definitely like cross media promotion, kind of not just anime, but then, you know, you have the mobile app games with the same characters, and you know, you have console games with the same characters. You know, that kind of brings in more audience from the gamer perspective and the anime perspective. And then yes, you know, older women in Japan, they spend, you know, money on mobile app games or any of the merchandise to, you know, collect not just the figurines, but you know, anything that's been released. And you know, I'm not, I'm no different. I'm a hoarder and collector myself, but that's definitely, kind of creating the whole environment, not just from anime, but, all the other lifestyle that you have that touches it as well.
Awesome. All right. So that was our last data-driven, I guess, conversation or slide. So just a quick plug. So you can actually get all of these insights from our Demand 360 Lite platform, which we're actually offering at 30% off discount to the webinar attendees. Samuel is going to post the instructions on how to claim that in the chat shortly. But we do want to make sure that we have some time to address some of the questions that have since come in, either prior to starting the webinar or over the Zoom chat right now. So I'm just going to pull up the questions that we've got, and we'll use the remaining time to address these questions. So first one, so Jerome, I think this one is for you. So as a creator / writer, what would be the best way to approach an animation studio with a project?
I wish we had LaShawn Thomas here because, and actually what I do, I would refer that questioner to Google LaShawn Thomas. He did a series of sort of short travelogue documentaries about his time in Korea. And there's some really good insight there about how he was able to find a home for Cannon Busters when he initially used Kickstarter to create the original pilot animation, which is where myself and Manga Entertainment came in as co-producers. But there are non-Japanese people working in the animation studios in Japan. They are on Twitter, they're on Instagram. There's a lovely network of people. Most of the animators that have moved to Japan to work are creators themselves. And so there is a network of people working within Japan that you may well be connected to one way or another. Might be through grad school, might be through one of the animation schools in North America or France or Europe, for example. So that was the way LaShawn got into satellite originally. But my advice after having that experience working directly with a studio is I wouldn't necessarily approach the studio. I would consider approaching Japanese animation directors, character designers, writers that you admire or want to work with, and reach out to them directly because you need to package your project. You need to have some of these key animation people attached in order to bring, they're often attached to studios themselves or have studios that want to work with them. And then that will also give you a great, will determine the team and the talent you've got. I'd also say approach producers directly or production committees, companies like Aniplex, for example, or Production IG, or who else do we have? I mean, some of these, Toho, Production IG, God, I'm forgetting. There's a bunch of studios that have officers or reps working in LA or New York, so based in North America. Some of them have reps in Europe as well. Festivals, Anime Expo, go to the festivals, see if you can attend panels, see if you can connect, go to Annecy Festival in France. I'm sure that's going to happen next year, definitely, as a real event again, but it'll be virtual. I think this year it's happening, I think, next week. The other thing you've really got to consider as a non-Japanese creator is, does my pitch appeal? Does my story, will my story work in Japan? Might my story work with Chinese anime fans? So research those audiences and have a think about that, because if you're pitching to a Japanese production committee, they're going to love the global opportunity, but in order to get these people over the line, you've got to give them something compelling that they will feel confident it's going to work in their market, in their home market.
That's fabulous advice. So I hope everybody took notes from that. Okay, so the next question, and this is really for anybody. So Doug, as you said, Jerome, feel free to pop right in. So we've been talking a lot. I know that there's a lot of like kids themes, anime genres like Pokemon, but there's also on the flip side a lot of more like violent or adult themes in anime content. So what do you think that there is for a future for anime with public broadcasters and linear networks? Again, because we've been talking a lot about streaming services and OTT, but where do you see anime and the future of anime on public broadcasting and traditional linear TV?
So by traditional linear TV, you're going to not include AVOD, right?
Correct. Yeah, non-streaming. Let's just go that route.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that you know, traditional linear TV is actually in decline, obviously.
Yes.
So, quite frankly, I think a lot of it would depend on the price, right? Because the price of content is going to dictate whether that stuff's going to get on the linear TV or not. So, you know, again, if you go back to kind of what I was saying earlier, if you look at the kind of the birth of anime in the U.S. was Astro Boy, Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy. That was actually put on NBC. It was cheap. It was, or not cheap. It was cheaper than the US product, right? So, you know, it got its opportunity because it was a little bit cheaper than something else. If you look at, you know, kind of the root of Netflix in the streaming part was buying, you know, relatively cheaper movies from stars and those kind of deals, kind of getting a start with cheap content, and then, you know, filling it with eyeballs later. And look at BET. BET was also started, I think, originally was actually free content that was, you know, focused on African Americans. He got it free. So don't discount the cost and the impact of that on getting something on TV that ultimately ends up into successful business or product.
And I think the type of content, the types of stories that are being produced out of Japan, I mean, it's such a wide gamut. And I think there needs to be more development, audience development on some of the, what we call slice of life sort of genre, which is totally suitable usually, I would say, for network television or terrestrial broadcast. It's usually often high school set dramas, relationship dramas with comedic elements, some really touching stuff, you know. And I mean, I've had the pleasure of working on some anime feature films, which there's some wonderful films like Wolf Children by Mamoru Hosoda and In This Corner of the World, which we worked on a couple of years ago. And again, those are great places to go if you're doing a bit of research and you want to look at what are the sort of types of stories that can be told in the medium, which are possibly more suitable content-wise, but also equally engaging and captivating, you know. So yeah, that's my piece on that one.
Great. And then just looking at the clock, we might have to wrap up soon. So Azusa, do you want to send us off with any final thoughts?
Yeah. So, you know, if anyone hasn't tried anime, it's not scary. So, you know, come and join us and find out what you like, because there is always something for you that you would appreciate or you can, you know, resonate with. And I'm really looking forward to growing this anime family and environment, like a bigger in the United States. And it's very exciting for the anime.
Fabulous. Rebecca, I guess to close it out.
That's right. So we're going to just say thank you so much to all of our panelists, Azusa, Jerome, Douglas. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Renee, for sharing all of this data. You guys might not know, but there has been a fabulous conversation happening in the chat room. There were a ton of questions that we didn't get to. We will reach out and we will make sure that some of those, those questions are answered. So again, that wraps it up for our Parrot Analytics Live. We'll share a recording of the session after the event today. And of course, you can get in touch with us on the email list shown on the screen. But everyone, Azusa, Jerome, Doug, Renee, and Samuel, thank you. And then thank you especially to our attendees. Great to speak with everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.